Okay, the latest in these series of interviews involves one of the genuine characters in European and world epilepsy, someone who's become very well known for his research and works as the main protagonist in one of the big residential epilepsy centres in Germany. So Bernhard Steinhoff, making a big reputation for himself, has been in epilepsy for over 30 years and a good friend. So it's an absolute pleasure to have him here today. Bernhard, thanks very much for giving up your time for this.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll be able to show a bit of what's happening behind the scenes, something that's going to help our junior researchers and our junior colleagues when we bring some of these quotes too. I think the main question, and the first question that always strikes me when I think about other people in their career in epilepsy, is why epilepsy? What got you involved in epilepsy?
That's a good question. When I was starting medical studies, and I was 20 years of age, by chance I came to the Kork Epilepsy Center. I'm the medical director of that center today. So 40 years ago, I was a medical student and came there to practice as a nurse during my studies. And I was fascinated from the first day on, from the patients, from the way they treated patients in Kork. And the first patient actually I met had a Unverricht-Lundborg disease, and I was really fascinated by that patient. And that time my mentor told me this patient would die within a couple of years, but she's still alive, she's still living on our campus. And that was so fascinating that at that age of 20, I decided to become an epileptologist.
And you've talked about the science, and you've talked about seeing patients with fascinating conditions. What is it that keeps you going through the day-to-day work in epilepsy care? What is it that motivates you in clinical practice?
You know, we deal with a disease that is characterized by paroxysmal events. And with our therapy, we try to prevent those paroxysmal events. But that very often causes a lifelong relationship sometimes with patients. And to follow them, you follow their life, and you're so grateful if you finally achieve seizure freedom for those patients without any considerable side effects of anti-seizure medications. And that is what keeps me alive, and hopefully what keeps the patients alive.
When we think about epilepsy care within neurology, it always strikes me that teamwork is much more of a requirement for epilepsy care than it is for other neurological conditions. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, in a way. But somebody has to have the hat on, and that's usually me in my center. And I try to share this empathy and this enthusiasm to the younger staff, of course, to the nurses. And at our center, we always had a lot of teamwork as well. We have brilliant nurses who are extremely familiar with the disease and with the challenges the patients have suffering from this disease. So you're right, in a way we need this teamwork, but we also need somebody who is in command.
One of the unique aspects of German epilepsy care, I think, is the reliance, the flourishing of residential centres. And I think that's a habit that many other countries have lost. What would you encourage people to think about when we're looking at long and medium-term residential care for epilepsy? What does it bring?
Well, the topic about residential care in Germany and in some other European countries is that we had this movement in the 19th century of deacony-driven epilepsy centers, which were asylums that time. And then over time, hospitals were founded, and therefore we have this mixture of campus, of residency, but also of hospitals. For example, in Kork, we have a hospital for 121 patients devoted to epilepsy exclusively, but we have more than 400 people living on the campus as well. And of course, we take care for them as well. But it's very important for me to claim that epilepsy can bother everybody, and it does not only mean, not necessarily mean handicaps and or other handicaps or comorbidities. We have to care for everybody with epilepsy, and that's what we are doing.
But again, that's what's really encouraging about the German model, that you can look after patients in the community, but there is a facility either for long or medium-term assessment, and the ability of Kork and Beetle and other centres to liaise with other European countries to say, look, some of you countries have lost this habit. You need to get this back. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure, I would. But it's more a traditional thing, as I said. So that's what we got for more than 100 years now. And we have some other centers like Chelfond in the UK or Heze in the Netherlands or Sandvika in Norway. And that is our tradition. And for young neurologists who come to our place, it's really fascinating because it's sort of old-style neurology. So you have a little bit more time to understand the whole story. And that is the major difference to usual hospitals who do brilliant care in epileptology, but this long-term perspective is lost.
Mm. I mean, one of the things I would like to say to our junior colleagues is, I think if you're going to get full training in epilepsy, really spending some time and having an attachment with a long-term, medium-term residential centre is absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. We welcome everybody, as long as the language is okay, which is sometimes a problem in Germany, of course. You guys in the UK and in other English-speaking countries have the privilege that people from abroad don't have these high hurdles of the language, and that is sometimes preventing other young people, very gifted people, to come to our place. So language is important.
Okay. You mentioned about your exposure to epilepsy at the age of 20. One of the things that's come up in some of our conversations has been people's first experience of a seizure, their first time they saw a seizure. When was the first time you saw a patient or a bystander having a seizure?
I think that was when I was around about 12 years of age, and that was by chance. We were just traveling to Italy, actually. Well, we are in Rome right now, but with my family, and there was a lady lying on the street with a tonic-clonic seizure. And my father stopped, who was a lawyer and not a neurologist, but he told me, look, this is a grand mal seizure from somebody who is suffering from epilepsy. So we took care for the lady. She was fine post-ictally, and then we moved on to Italy.
Okay. And did it impact on you?
Oh, yes, of course, yeah. Of course. Both the seizure itself and the recovery of the patient as well. That was one point. And the other point when I started my career was, of course, that time in the 1980s. Epilepsy already was a disease you could treat. That time, thinking about MS and other neurological diseases, it was more or less a nightmare. You could, as a neurologist that time, very often you could tell the patient the sophisticated diagnosis, and then you were asked, okay, about the therapy, and you didn't know anything. And that was a major difference, and that was another reason why I chose epileptology. And nowadays, of course, it's much easier and much better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes wonder if, the unusual thing about epilepsy is that people will come across it in the workplace, in schools, out and about in the street, and that makes it unusual among other neurological conditions as well.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned in passing your mentor, and I think mentorship is absolutely vital in the long-term training of epilepsy.
That's true.
Can you tell us a bit more about your mentor and what qualities they brought to you and what they've left you with?
Well, my mentors apparently were the medical directors of the Kork Epilepsy Center that time, who were neuropediatricians. And I did my medical thesis in pediatrics as well. And those were absolutely fascinating people, charismatic, living for epilepsy. At that time, young people cannot imagine. They were living on the campus. They were almost living with the patients and the residential people there. And they were just very charismatic. So I remember this, one of my mentors was Rolf Kruse, and he told me, okay, if you want to join us, you have to live epileptology. And so it was a little bit pathetic, but it was true.
And I think we are, across the profession as a whole and across the continent, we're losing some of that continual devotion. Although it's really important to take yourself out of work, we are losing a wee bit of that sense of identity and being exactly who you are.
That's true.
Obviously, your record in publishing, both in clinical trials and in real-world evidence is huge and very prolific. What do you find are the biggest barriers to continuing to produce high-quality research?
Oh, that's a very good question. Although I have this affiliation with the University of Freiburg, we're more or less a non-academic epilepsy hospital. And then you have some hurdles nowadays. For example, just an example, if you speak about open access journals, who's paying for that? Yeah. There's no way I have to arrange that every time at my center. That sometimes it's not so easy because in those centers, care is more important than science. But, I proceeded with my career at the University Hospital of Munich, and I learned neurology, which is essential as well. Not only epileptology, you have to learn neurology. And my boss that time was Thomas Brandt, and he told me, okay, if you leave, remember, one paper, first authorship every year. And I want you to do that, and that's what's still in my mind. And I try to transport that because without publishing, without science, we have no progress. And that is, do you say that in English, the salt in the soup? Well, we say it in German.
Salt in the soup, okay.
Yeah. and that's exactly what it means for me. And I hope I can transfer that to the younger staff of my center.
Okay. And one of the things that we've been asking about people is whether they have any regrets over their career. Is there any project left unfinished? Is there any route of research that you've not taken that now you look back on thinking, I wish I'd done that at the time?
About 30. About 30. There's such a lot to do still. And my clinical work, I see about 50 outpatients a week. I'm the medical director of the center. I have a lot of tasks to do. And there are at least 30 projects I would like to address. And perhaps after retirement, I'm not sure. My wife and I are arguing about that. But there's so many fields I'm interested in epileptology that are not covered right now. It's a mess.
Yeah, but I think that, again, a message to our junior colleagues that this curiosity is absolutely the fuel that drives not just careers, but drives progress in the field. And if you lose that curiosity and you lose that drive, you've really
absolutely. There are so many open questions that are not addressed right now in the world of epileptology. And therefore, I said about 30 projects. I don't know. We have those long-term histories of our patients in Kork, thousands of them, so many interesting stories others could learn from. And so if I had something like a sabbatical, which we don't have in Germany, which is a pity, I would certainly use this sabbatical.
Okay. I get the impression, not just conferences like this, but in general, that there's much more optimism around epilepsy now than there was 10 or 20 years ago, much more forward-looking. Would you share that view?
Probably yes, because we have so many new fields. We are speaking about genetics. We are speaking about epilepsy surgery. If you consider, for example, the patients with focal cortical dysplasias. 20 years ago, nobody was aware of that, but thanks to the MRI, we know now about several reasons of epilepsy that can be cured by epilepsy surgery and things like that. We have new techniques, neurostimulation, new anti-seizure medications. Of course, there's a lot of optimism. But after more than 30 years of epileptology, it's wise to have some skepticism as well. And so let's see.
Okay, and where do you think the biggest areas of progress? You mentioned surgery, you mentioned imaging, and you touched on genetics.
Yes.
Tell me about the potential for genetics that you see, particularly with the very hard-to-treat epilepsies.
I personally think in 5 or 10 years, we have another new epilepsy classification based on genetics, partially at least, because that is this interesting step towards precision medicine. And everolimus and tuberous sclerosis and epilepsy is a wonderful example, and we definitely hope, and I'm very optimistic, that we will identify more epilepsy syndromes based on genetics, and that we will have the chance to address this disease, not only the symptom, which is the epileptic seizure, but also the underlying disease, and that is precision medicine, and that will be a dramatic step forward.
One of the things I've been asking people is if you have any phrases, any lessons, you've given us a good flavour of the things that are required to make it in clinical research in epilepsy and also in clinical practice in epilepsy. What hints would you give our junior colleagues as they watch on here?
Watch, listen and think.
Okay. And we'll cut it at that. That's the salt in the soup. And don't put too much salt in your soup, but other than that, we're fine. We're all right.
That's right.
Listen, Bernhard, thanks very much. That's been absolutely fabulous in a lesson. I've not seen any questions from the crowd. So we
is there a crowd?
Up and there is a crowd. They've all got their headphones in. But listen, thanks very much for your time today. And I'm very much looking forward to collating this with the other responses as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, JP.